you've given us a lot, and
I mean,
we'll take more too.
These issues are, utility issues. I've learned more than I care to know on this because it's just so, when you really start digging and you start understanding how unsafe methane is, how unsafe these pipelines are, how, this massive fracking boom all over the country is leading to this big rush by utilities to just build out all this gas because they make money off of it. It really makes you sick to your stomach when you take a step back and say, we're living in an era where these big powers are not giving up this power because they see the writing on the wall and they're doing the fossil fuel industry is so strong in this country. I mean, we wage wars over the fossil fuel industry, I mean, we literally destroy other countries just to meet our energy needs because the oil industry, the gas industry, the coal industry are so powerful. Living that as an organizer, it really it stokes my fire to see these issues because as an area that there's no reason why we should not be a clean energy leader in this country. The only reason it is because these energy companies have so much political power and they donate to campaigns and they make sure that these elected officials are on their side.
Remember sometime in the 90s, T-Bone Pickens selling natural gas. He was getting all kinds of politicians to join and buy part of his company.
Right.
And the natural gas was the next best thing.
Right. Yeah, there was a long time where people considered it a bridge fuel, something that was going to get us from using coal and oil, diesel, towards, a cleaner future. But what ended up happening, no one expected this in the fossil fuel industry, was that solar, battery technology, wind technology all started plummeting in price. And this is something that I feel is worth diving into, is that the reason that happened is because we're talking about a fuel source, which is a scarce resource that has a limited supply, that has a fluctuating price over time, versus a technology which only decreases in cost over time. For example, it's like the price of gold, which is something that fluctuates over time, versus, or even goes up over time because the resource dwindles, versus something like a computer or a plasma television, something like that. When it first came out, it was very experimental. There was a lot of costs and R&D to get it to that point. So the first models that came out were not as efficient, very expensive. I remember it was probably $3,000 to get a 32-inch or something like that. Meanwhile, over the next 10 years, you saw those costs plummeting to where you can go into Walmart and buy a flat screen plasma for like $200, $300 now.
That's right.
So it's a technology versus a fuel source, a limited resource versus something that's just going to be improved, and the costs are going to continue to decrease over time. That's what we're dealing with in this clean energy fight, is that gas for a long time was thought to be a cleaner fuel source because, it is true when you burn a gas fire versus other fossil fuels that there is somewhat of a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions at that fire. But what no one counted on is these pipelines and the amount of leaks that come from these pipelines. Yeah. I've seen studies, I don't know if Mr. Bailey shared this, but I've seen studies that have said that we would have to reduce the amount of leaks from these pipelines by 1/3 for gas to be on par with coal.
Why go to that trouble when you can start with solar?
Well, and this is the thing, is that gas is invisible. It's very hard to detect from just seeing it.
Right.
So it's almost impossible for these gas companies to keep up with the amount of leaks that they have going on. So it's nonsense when people say that this is somehow better for the environment or anything, because they're not looking at the holistic picture. They're not looking at the impact that fracking is having on our communities. You mentioned Pennsylvania earlier.
Absolutely.
Anybody who's seen Gasland, Josh Fox's movie, that is what really woke me up to. And I know there's a lot of controversy over some of those scenes in there, but Gasland 2 is less controversial in terms of the information that he has in there. But it's just as stark and just as crucial of a reminder as to why fracking is so bad for the environment. And I imagine Mr. Bailey mentioned this because this is something that he's a little bit of an expert on. The Halliburton loophole, which allows gas companies to operate at reduced costs, is something that needs to be addressed. So basically, Dick Cheney's company back in the mid-2000s had investments in gas, and they had investments in this technology. So what they ended up doing in the very Cheney type way was they got a loophole put in place for fracking to where they don't have to meet clean air or clean water standards. So they were able to, under trademark and trade secret, inject chemicals into the ground and not disclose to people what those chemicals are.
Right.
we were talking before we got on air also about how much water goes into these, how much water pollution. We're talking about millions of gallons of water goes into these wells. So all of this is basically the government's way of subsidizing fracking, because if we did not have those loopholes, if we forced them to meet Clean Air, Clean Water Act standards, the way we do with other fuel sources, there is no way that gas would be cost competitive. It would absolutely falter under that test. So, eventually that's going to be repealed, because eventually that loophole, it can't be here forever. Eventually people are going to wake up and say, this has to go away, and when it does, we're going to see the price of gas skyrocket. And at that point, anybody who has any large gas investments are going to be forced to do, clean energy investments. What we're saying is, let's not wait till that point. Let's not wait till, we're forced through, repealing these onerous regulations. Let's not waste the money now, because it's just going to end up being a dead cost to us in 10 years or 15 years or whenever this gets repealed, or when gas becomes uneconomical, which it's pretty much on the verge of that. We saw FPL's parent company, NextEra, say that they're not planning on building any more gas peaker plants past 2020. So because they very clearly said they see the writing on the wall again that solar energy is going to be the cheaper alternative.
FPL?
Yeah, Florida Power and Light.
Okay.
That's the biggest utility in the state of Florida. They operate about half the state, and their parent company NextEra has made a very clear commitment towards clean energy, because they've said, and their own CEO said, that gas is not going to be economical.
So they're committing to no more gas powered plants.
Gas peaker plants, yes.
Oh, gas peaker.
So peaker, just to get into the weeds a little bit, and I'm sorry if I lose people on this,
That's
but
okay.
the peaker plants are basically what reach peak demand. So whenever like the coldest day of the year, whenever everybody has their heaters on, or the hottest day in the year when everybody has their AC on, demand for electricity is much higher than it is on average days. So they have these peaker plants around to fire up quickly to get people their energy when it's demanded. And those are only operational at certain times. But the thing before was that gas was the energy choice for those, because it's much quicker to fire up than coal. Coal it's very expensive to fire up coal boilers, and it takes a lot of time and energy. Whereas with gas, it's much quicker process. But what we're seeing now is with solar and battery, we don't need that, because solar and battery is also instantaneous. It's actually quicker than gas. So, when the largest utility company in the state sees the writing on the wall and is dedicated to doing 30 million solar panels before 2030, our question to TECO is, why aren't you doing something similar? They've made some small commitments to solar. I want to give them some credit for that. But even with the 1,200 megawatts of solar they're planning on doing, that would still leave them at only about 6% of their energy coming from clean energy. And again, that sets us up for using way too much fossil fuels, leaving way too much of a greenhouse gas impact, and setting us up for catastrophic sea level rise.
Now, what I've noticed, because I'm originally from California, or I moved here from California, our DWP, Department of Water and Power, very powerful. I know that sounds like a pun, but they are extremely strong.
Right.
They get wonderful wages.
Mm-hmm.
They're not government, they're quasi.
Right.
So they spend a lot of money. If you get a job with them, you make way above industry standard money. So it's hard for them to let go of that. And that was California.
Right.
They actually had a confrontation with the mayor of California. This was in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly. The mayor said, "Hey, you've got more money than you need. We need it to improve whatever the city mayor needed doing." And there was a standoff there. They finally had to give up some money.
Right.
But and I think the same thing is sort of like that here, that TECO has become so powerful.
Right.
They probably, I'm guessing they have a lot of money. I don't know that for a fact.
Oh, like I mentioned, Emera is bragging about how much money TECO makes, because they get about 39% of their revenue from TECO.
Well, it's hard to let go of that.
Absolutely.
If you're in power.
Well, that's...
So
again,
you can imagine all these homes, if the whole area had, plates on the top of our roofs, that would make them less important.
Yeah.
And so it's, they're voting to diminish themselves.
Well, we have to remind people that TECO is not just a private industry company. This is not something that's like, Coke versus Pepsi, that, well, if you don't like them, then you can just go buy something else.
Right.
This is a public utility, meaning that they have a obligation to the public. And they have an obligation to meet the energy demands of the public at the lowest cost possible. Now, I'm glad you brought that up, because TECO actually, for this proposal, this $858 million proposal, is actually evading a fairly standard step in this process called a needs determination. Oh. So whenever a power plant gets proposed, it usually goes to the standard review by the Public Service Commission, and they do what's called a needs determination step to determine, is this something that the energy demands, that the energy needs of your area, of your service area, demands. Do you need this power plant to meet your energy needs? A. And are you meeting it? B, at a cost competitive rate? Are you doing this? They would put it up for open bid to prove that this is the most cost effective solution. Now, TECO has done a very interesting thing here, in that in order to trigger this, I'm going to get, for those of you who are into energy policy, you're in for a good amount of knowledge here. This is where I get very wonky. So in order to evade this needs determination step, because in order to trigger that, you have to have a net increase of a certain wattage. So what TECO did very cleverly is that they claimed, this is an existing site, which it is, we'll give them that, but they are expanding it somewhat. So since it's an existing site and there's nothing, they took off about 900 megawatts of coal at the same time they're bringing on about 1,100 megawatts of gas. So that difference is not enough to trigger the needs determination step. They took off just enough of coal to where they don't have to go through this needs determination step, so that they can basically just push this through without any real sunlight hitting this project.
And that's what we need. We need to show this.
So while I got your ear on energy issues and how this all works and how just sordid this all is, what's written in the Florida Constitution is that utility companies get an 11.5% guaranteed rate of return on any big expensive projects. So I want everybody that's listening to internalize that. They get 11.5% on any dollar that they spend. So, and remember, this is your money, not their money. When TECO very much is like a waiter with a guaranteed tip. Whenever you go to a restaurant, there's a guaranteed tip there. Your waiter is not going to say, I think you should skip the appetizer. Maybe you should order the least expensive thing on the menu. You know what? Skip that bottle of wine. No. That waiter's going to say, you know what? Go for a bottle of wine. Go for it. I used to wait tables. I know how it is. They'll say, hey, get a dessert, get everything, take home some for the dog. You know what I mean? But why do they do that? Because they want to drive up the bill, so they get their percentage is higher. TECO very much acts in the same way. Oh, they like to drive up the bill so that they get the maximum amount of return out of that of their 11.5%. They get as much as they can, and that maximizes their profits. And that's how they operate. Is that they love to build these big expensive projects because it adds to their capital, it adds to their profits, and then guess what? If in 10 years gas is no longer economical, we have a rise in the price of gas to where there's no way it's economical, then guess what happens? They just say, all right, we're gonna scrap this plant, we're gonna call it obsolete, and then we're gonna build another expensive project. But guess what? That was just $1 billion we just flushed down the toilet. So we're here to say that we cannot wait for this. There's no reason when all the economics tell us that this is not a wise investment, that it's gonna end up costing us more in the long run. We cannot wait for that. We have to act now and make sure that TECO understands this is not something that we want. That we don't want to keep feeding your profits at our own demise. Right.
It sounds stupid, to be perfectly frank. I mean, we're encouraging them, or we're allowing them to build again later on, so that they can get their 11.5%.
I wouldn't call it stupid, because it's actually quite smart. It's sinister, is what it is.
Yeah.
It's
stupid for us.
Well, it's stupid for us, but it's evil genius, is what I'll call it. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, for that, I'd put up paneling. I'd make all the offices gorgeous.
Yeah.
To drive the bill up.
It's been very clear that if we were talking about safe, resilient energy sources, we need to start moving towards a distributed grid. We need to start moving towards solar energy. I mentioned earlier about how Tampa is the 8th most ready city for rooftop solar. Just to to give everybody a quick reminder of how utilities feel about solar, I mean, I know FPL just made this big commitment, but just back in 2016, all the utilities in the state spent millions of dollars to try to promote a fake solar amendment. Amendment 1.
That's right.
That was one of the worst things I've ever seen. They were literally trying to con people into voting against solar. So my question is, again, why are these utility companies doing this? It's because it threatens their power. It threatens their ability to make customers do whatever they want, to make the governments do whatever they want. And you know what? They were never meant to act this way. We're very much living in a trust era in terms of, when I think back to the early 1900s, when we had the big companies that ran everything, that's how our utilities are right now, is that they have so much power and they're so ingrained in the process that they're literally just getting away with whatever they want. And it's creating a power dynamic that's totally unbalanced.
So who do they report to, other than their stockholders in Canada? But I mean,
right.
We used to have a utility board, I think, in Jersey.
So there's the Public Service Commission here.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, TECO is evading that step because they did a very interesting one too, where they took off just enough coal to bring on the amount of gas that they're bringing on and not trigger that needs determination step. So this, like I mentioned y'all before, the more you dig into this, the more just ridiculous it becomes.
So we should also be calling the Public Service Commission, and I'll get that phone number put on.
I would say also Governor DeSantis is the ultimate decision maker on this. He's from Dunedin, so he's from the Tampa Bay area. I imagine he would like to see Dunedin stay above water.
I would think.
Dunedin actually just pledged this last year to become a 100% clean energy city. They're not in TECO service area, but the climate change that would come from this plant would surely affect them. So, again, writing Governor DeSantis, also Nikki Fried, our Commissioner of Agriculture. These are great people that you should reach out to and let them know that this plan is a disaster for Florida, and we need to start changing course immediately.
Yes, definitely. But they don't want to let go. I know I'm bringing up LA again, but they were having a luxury, fancy restaurants bring in food to feed the staff.
Yeah.
And when we found out about it, I mean, not that we want to give them hamburgers, but nonetheless, when you go to the high-end, expensive restaurants, costing, I think it was a bill of $50,000. I mean, it was outrageous, and we all got upset about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the level of corruption you see with these stuff, it's incredible. A lot of these TECO execs don't live anywhere near the power plant, so they don't live, they live as far away from this. So it's really interesting how they end up making these plans that have all these dire impacts from pollution and from just coal burning, because they're not actually getting rid of coal. So that's another big misconception that's out there, is that this gas is going to be replacing coal. It's not. It's actually just going to be supplementing the coal that they're burning there. They actually plan on increasing their coal usage through the 2020, which is very interesting. Yeah, this is all coming from their 10-year site plan, which you can find online at the Public Service Commission's website. If you type in 10-year site plan TECO, you can find that information. Around, I think it's page 83. You see they have a chart where they show their year-by-year energy mix, how much energy they're going to be getting from different sources of fuel. And it shows there very clearly they're going to be increasing their coal usage from 2024 through 2027 to where in 2027 they're going to be burning almost as much coal as they are burning this year. So, they did another interesting one too. They're going to be decreasing their coal, from now until 2023, and they like to cite that 2023 number a lot. That's if you talk to them, they say, oh, well, in 2023 we're going to be at an all-time low for fossil fuel usage. We're going to be getting 6.5% of our energy from solar. But then after that, the amount of solar they use starts to decrease, and the amount of coal they're using starts to increase. So it's very much a PR move. It's very much, they're just doing this just to make people feel like they're moving in the right direction, but they're not. It's a total just token investment just to get the people that care about Florida's environment off their backs and to make them seem like a clean, green energy company, but they're not. They're absolutely not. They're doing everything they can to maximize their profits, and with very little regard, I would actually say zero regard, for Floridians.
Yeah, if we go back to Victorian England and we think about how the fog was black from soot, there wasn't a natural fog. I mean, the fog was natural. It was colored by the soot from the chimneys, and everybody was using coal. Yeah. I don't think anybody in their right mind would want to go back to that kind of living.
I mean, I've met people that live in the shadow of that coal plant that have had serious health impacts. Very clearly. I've met people that have cancer. I've met people that have, respiratory illnesses. They have to live on breathing tubes. One person I met in particular, they had a friend who was they're on a breathing machine, and their friend was also on a breathing machine. They said that their friend ended up leaving the area right around that coal plant. Within a year of moving that area, they didn't need their breathing machine anymore.
Oh, well, that's startling.
This is, we're seeing this is that in areas where there's gas leaks, in areas where there's fracked wells, in areas where there's coal plants, we're seeing premature births, we're seeing low birth weights, we're seeing higher incidence of cancer, of asthma. And, what we're here to say is there is no reason why we need to be sacrificing people's health and well-being just so that we can turn the lights on. There's no reason for it. It's an enormous mistake, and it has very dire consequences. And the more we ignore that, the more we're just allowing other people to suffer, and we're just turning a blind eye to that. And I don't believe in living like that. And I don't think y'all do. That's why y'all are doing this.
That's correct. So we need to get solar panels on our roofs. If we can, we need to convince the government that they need to give us rebates
right.
of some
well,
sort.
I mean, we like to. Consumer choices are definitely, important. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Obviously, our individual contributions will make a big impact. But I also like to make people understand that these power plants, like the one we're fighting against right now, has a much larger. I mean, you could add up all the people in Tampa Bay, and it still wouldn't even come close to making a dent in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that this power plant is. This power plant that TECO is proposing would have the same greenhouse gas emissions as over 600,000 extra cars on our roads.
Oh my goodness.
So, I also saw a stat once. I don't want to quote it exactly because I'm not 100% sure on the numbers, but if we got the biggest companies in the world to clean up their act, we would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by over half.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's where we really need to put the onus is. I agree that individuals need to make their decisions wiser and live for a better environment, live a more holistic life. But the biggest impact we can make is holding these large stakeholders accountable and making sure that they're making the right decision.
Well, we are planning to go. We'll be there March 11th at the
Riverview Hilton.
There we go. Yeah, March 11th. Hearing at the Riverview Hilton Garden Inn at 4328 Garden Vista Drive. Be there at 5 p.m. And before you come, call your county commissioners and call Public Service Board. Is that the
Public
board?
Service Commission.
Public Service Commission.
And also Representative Adams Hattersley. I imagine a lot of your listeners are in this area.
No, he doesn't represent.
Oh, okay.
Most of our listeners are Waimama,
okay.
Sun City area.
Gotcha.
Waimama to 25 miles going all the way around.
Gotcha.
So it would be Galvano.
Okay.
And Rayburn. Did Rayburn retire? It's the new guy who begins with a B. I will make sure it's online.
I'm sorry, Adam, if you get too many phone calls.
That's all right. If we fire him up, that would be good too.
Yeah, Gonzalo Valdes, thank you, man. It's appreciative. Riverview as well.
If you want more information about this, look up the hashtag #TellTheTruthTeco. Also, you can look up our Facebook event, type in People's Forum on TECO, and you should be able to find the event online through that.
Fabulous.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.